Article 27 of the Mexican Constitution made it impossible for an individual farmer to pass that or sell that piece of land to any private individual. That land had to go back to the community, and that the community would reassign that plot of land to somebody else so that they can grow their food and feed their family. Article 27 of the Mexican Constitution guaranteed that a person will have access to land, and that's why the slogan of Emiliano Zapata, Tierra y Libertad, land and freedom. That was the main gain out of the Mexican Revolution. And in one signing of the pen, that the United States told Mexico, you want to engage in this economic, what they call progress, that you would have to take this article out of your constitution. Imagine Mexico making the same demand to the United States. It would never happen, right? But in the real quick, swift signing of the pen, Carlos Salinas de Gortari, in a grotesque display of disrespect, with the portrait of Zapata in the background, signed away Article 27 of the Mexican Constitution in 1993. And what does this mean for the farmers? Well, what happened is after 1994, once this economic policy came into place, U.S. grown corn flooded the Mexican market. So the farmer, the Mexican campesino, who does not have the tax credits, who does not have subsidies, who does not have the machinery, the huge, gigantic machinery that U.S. farm growers have, had to compete with U.S. grown corn. And what did this mean to the Mexican farmer? That he had to sell his corn and compete with these large transnational corporations. And so Mexico, the country that introduced corn to the world, now imports the majority of the corn that is consumed in Mexico. The Mexican farmer could no longer compete with that. So he had two options, really three options. Number one, actually four options. Number one, he could or she could move and migrate into the city to find work, eventually migrating north to the border towns where maquiladoras and assembly plants opened up, or eventually north, which many did, or change what they grew, which instead of growing corn, they can grow marijuana now, and it's much more profitable. Or they can join the guerrilla armies that prompted and grew out of the struggles for land, such as the Ejército Zapatista de Liberación Nacional. And fourth, which I already mentioned, it's really three, is to come here, to come to the US and find work here, which is what a lot of people did. Before 1994, how many undocumented people do you guys think there were in the US? Before 1994. There was an estimated 3 to 4 million undocumented people without papers, without the authorization of the state. Today, how many do they say there are? Roughly 12, between 12 to 20 million. That's what they say. They can't count them because obviously it's the reason why it's called undocumented migration, right? But what happened in Mexico after 1994? The so-called progress that they offered said that there would be much more affluence in Mexico. Well, there's a lot more affluence, but for very few individuals. In fact, the richest person in the world today is a Mexican, right? But at the same time that there is the richest man in the world today is a Mexican, there's also an estimated 50% of the Mexican nation that lives below poverty, and 30% of those in extreme poverty, meaning that they live on less than $1 a day. So it did not bring progress to our country. In fact, the entire diet of the Mexican people changed as well. We no longer consume as much tortilla as we used to. Now we enjoy Burger King, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Pizza Hut, Starbucks, and all that terrible stuff that they impose on our communities here and around the world now. So there's a direct correlation between the expropriation of people's lands and resources, and that same people chasing those resources back into the empire where those resources end up. The same resources that the U.S. is going into Mexico and taking is the same resources that that same Mexican population is coming back for. So we're just following our own resources that has been stolen from us. There's a reality that even though the U.S. is 5% of the world's population, it consumes more than 30% of the world's resources. I'm sorry, 60% of the world's resources. Europe, the United States, and Japan combined use up 80% of the world's resources. And we cannot talk about democracy, cannot talk about justice, we cannot talk about any form of freedom when you have a relationship that is so clear between slave and slave master, between the oppressor and the oppressed, between those that have and those that don't have. Right? Say that 4 individuals in the world today, 4 individuals have more wealth than the 48 poorest countries. We cannot talk about a world of justice, peace, and democracy. That does not exist on this planet. And so what do we have? We have that same year that NAFTA came into effect, guerrilla armies prompted up, yes, in the southernmost states of Mexico, the Zapatista Army for National Liberation, that said that the NAFTA is the death sentence to our communities. And that we're going to rise up and that we're going to defend it, just like Zapata defended it, tierra y libertad, land and freedom, and that struggle continues today. On our front, which we recognize as Unión del Barrio, that we are the northern front of that same struggle. What we see in our communities is a militarization of our communities. And what do we mean by militarization? We mean that there is an army, a standing army, being placed along the border. And that same army is the army that is chasing our people down and hunting us like animals, like the sister mentioned earlier. And to illustrate that in a real way, I have this video. So what we see in our communities are these immigration raids, where agency, the Border Patrol, would go out and chase down our community like animals. Based on racial profiling, based on visual scans, they identify who they're going to question, right? And in this video here, they started getting on buses and trolleys after, well, it's happened before 9/11, but it intensified after 9/11. And we know what the excuse was, right? That Bush put out as a premise of this war against terror, more like war of terror, right?
Yes, yeah. That's right.
And so what they did is that they literally terrorized our communities and started.